Can you even imagine a world without email? I'm an elder millennial, so I kind of can, but even by the time I was in high school, a lot of people had them. And now we live in a world where I don't think most organizations could function without email. And I think that is a problem. And there's somebody else who thinks it's a problem too, author Cal Newport, who wrote this amazing book called A World Without Email. I want to get into it today because I think this is a really big problem, and he offers some solutions. Why does this matter? Why is it a big deal that we are all existing just on email? Well, I think the number one problem that it creates is something that Cal Newport calls a hyperactive hive mind. It creates this situation where everyone always feels like they have to be on. They have to answer every email. They have to answer every ping on their phone, and they can never really get focused and do some real work. I remember I was working with an executive at a really large organization, and this was an organization that kind of was, it had a customer service function inside the organization. And so this leader set the standard for their team that said, if you get an email from somebody within the company, I expect you to answer it within 15 minutes. Which on the one hand can seem great. You're trying to be customer friendly. But on the other hand, it means that nobody in the organization can reliably get a block of focused work that's more than 15 minutes long, right? You have to constantly change from one thing to the other. And that's ultimately the problem with this hyperactive hive mind that Newport talks about, is it prevents you from doing any real deep work where you can actually get things done. I honestly think most people think that having a productive day means coming into work, answering emails, and going to meetings. When I don't know what that does. That may or may not do anything. And it really brings up this idea of the difference between a maker schedule and a manager schedule, right? The executive that said answer emails within 15 minutes, they probably lived on a manager schedule, where a manager schedule is their whole day is broken up into 15 and 30-minute blocks, where their whole job is to be available to everybody. But that's because they're a manager. They're not a maker. They're not somebody who's actually solving problems and creating products. And a maker schedule relies on big blocks of 2, 3, 4 hours. I know for myself, as someone that produces content, if you put one meeting in my morning, if it's in the wrong spot, it might destroy the productivity of the whole morning, right? Because I can't get into flow, because I know an hour and a half in, I'm going to have to jump out to this meeting, and then I have the meeting and I come back and I'm not really focused, and then it's 45 minutes until lunch or something, like it just destroys the whole day really, really quickly. And so creating these spaces of openness where you can really get things done is really, really important to having a productive team. And email is one of the primary things destroying that. And why does email specifically, and other forms of communication that we have like Slack and other instant messengers, why is that creating this hyperactive hive mind? According to Newport, the number one problem is that it's frictionless. And in the book, he describes this using an example of IBM. When IBM set up their first internal email server where they could all send emails to one another. And this was going to be expensive. This was back in the 70s. And so they wanted to make sure they bought enough computers to set up the system. And so they did a big research study they looked at all of the inter-office memos, right? Because that's what we had before email, where you would have a literal piece of paper where you'd write down your note and pass it off to a secretary or somebody who would run it around off to the other part of the company. So they did this research project to figure out how much inter-office communication was happening. And they said, okay, we'll double that. And that's how big the email system should be. So that's what they did. They built it out. And I believe it was within 72 hours of turning the system on, it crashed. Because as soon as they turned it on, the amount of communication flowing inside the organization actually quadrupled. Because think about it. Think about how much less friction there is of simply saying, typing somebody's name, writing an email and sending it, versus writing out a note that you give to somebody that they pass on, or going and finding them, or calling them on the phone, right? The frictionlessness of the communication makes it so much easier to just ask a question than try to find a solution yourself, or just shoot off a quick note without actually thinking about it. And so the way out of this problem, if you are a manager that needs your team to be more productive and you want to break out of this, then what Newport suggests is that you create systems of communication rather than just thinking about everything as a ping or an inbox, or you're just talking whenever it's most convenient to you. So rather than somebody, sending you updates every time they finish a project, say, okay, no, once a week, we're going to have a team update email where everybody's going to follow this format and they're going to send it all and they're going to say, these are the things that I got done. These are the things I'm doing next week. These are the blockers that I need help with. Now, does that mean that some problems are going to take longer to solve? Yes, because they're not necessarily coming up to you right away. But what it gives everyone is a consistent way to know this is when I'm communicating things. And so all this other time now opens up where I can actually be productive. And of course, you could still set boundaries of if it's truly a blocker where you can't move forward at all, bring it up to me immediately. But there's other examples of this where one of my clients, actually, we were just talking about this, where they kind of outlined when should I email versus when should I text versus when should I call. Right. And so email, it was known that they set the standard look, I'm out in the field. This was somebody who worked with a lot of technicians that are out in the field. I'm out in the field. I'm not always checking my email. I can't be expected to always check my email. So if you send me an email, know that it might be 3 or 4 hours before I see it. I will see it. I will answer you before the end of the day. But if you're sending me an email, know that that's the expectation. Text me if you want me to get to you as soon as I'm done whatever I'm doing right now. So I'm in the middle of a task. I'm not necessarily going to break out, but probably within 15 to 20 minutes, I will check my text and get back to you. If you need something now, if you need me to stop what I am doing and help you for whatever reason, then call me. Right? And so that was the hierarchy of emails are for just standard stuff that's by the end of the day. Texts are get to me in the next 20 or 30 minutes. And then phones are I need your help right now. Really clear. Now everybody knows. Now people can start to break out from that hyperactive hive mind. Another great example that Newport uses of how you could set up a system is, let's say you have a team of software engineers, and normally software engineers, their job is writing code, but they're spending a ton of their time just checking emails. And so what you could do is actually set it up where there is only, let's say you have a pod of 4, or let's say 5, for simplicity, 5 people. You have 5 software engineers. They're in a little pod. And let's imagine you have one email for that whole pod, and it just rotates. On Monday, this person watches it. On Tuesday, this person watches it. And so the person watching it, they're watching everything. And if something is relevant where everybody needs to know, they can tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, by the way, this thing happened. But everybody else, headphones on, go to town, right? It removes them from this hyperactive hive mind so they can actually get productive. So if you find yourself in a world where both you and your team are struggling in a world with email, you can't even imagine a world without email. And as a result, you're all pulled in all these different directions and you're just not getting enough done. I highly recommend you pick up A World Without Email. It is absolutely fantastic. I think you're going to love it, and it might just solve some of your problems as well. If you found this helpful, make sure you like and subscribe. This was actually the first video in a series that we're going to be doing of reviewing a number of really fantastic books about how to be a more effective manager. So come back here if you want to see the next one.